Hi guys, I hope you guys are staying safe. I miss all of you right now. Now, I know that I missed yesterday's video, and in turn for that, I have decided that today I'm going to do 2 chapters of a read aloud, okay? I really wanted to finish A Tale Dark and Grim for us, but it is in the classroom still, and we are not allowed in the classrooms right now. So to hold us over until we get to go back to school, I am going to read one of my favorite books that my 4th grade teacher introduced to me, and it is called Sideways Stories from Wayside School. Now, if you've read it, don't ruin it for anybody, but in this book, we're going to learn about all the different adventures of the students and the teachers, okay? Our first chapter is called Mrs. Gorf. Mrs. Gorf had a long tongue and pointed ears. She was the meanest teacher in Wayside School. She taught class on the 30th story. Whew, I'm glad inquiry is not that big. If you children are bad, she warned, or if you answer a problem wrong, I'll wiggle my ears, stick out my tongue, and turn you into apples. Mrs. Gorf didn't like children, but she loved apples. Why is Mrs. Gorf a teacher if she doesn't like children? Joe couldn't add. He couldn't even count. But he knew that if he answered a problem wrong, he would be turned into an apple. So he copied from John. He didn't like to cheat, but Mrs. Gorf had never taught him how to add. One day, Mrs. Gorf caught Joe copying John's paper. She wiggled her ears, first her right one, then her left, stuck out her tongue, and turned Joe into an apple. Then she turned John into an apple for letting Joe cheat. Do you guys think that's fair? Just think about it. Let's keep reading. Hey! That isn't fair, said Todd. John was only trying to help a friend. Mrs. Gorf wiggled her ears, first her right one, then her left, stuck out her tongue, and turned Todd into an apple. Does anybody else have an opinion? She asked. Nobody said a word. Mrs. Gorf laughed and placed the 3 apples on her desk. Stephen started to cry. He couldn't help it. He was scared. I do not allow crying in the classroom, said Mrs. Gorf. She wiggled her ears, first her right one, then her left, stuck out her tongue, and turned Stephen into an apple. For the rest of the day, the children were absolutely quiet. And when they went home, they were too scared even to talk to their parents. But Joe, John, Todd, and Stephen couldn't go home. Mrs. Gorf just left them on her desk. They were able to talk to each other, but they didn't have much to say. Their parents were very worried. They didn't know where their children were. Nobody seemed to know. The next day, Kathy was late for school. As soon as she walked in, Mrs. Gorf turned her into an apple. Paul sneezed during class. He was turned into an apple. Nancy said, "God bless you," when Paul sneezed. Mrs. Gorf wiggled her ears, first her right one, then her left, stuck out her tongue, and turned Nancy into an apple. Guys, I'm not really liking Mrs. Gorf. She sounds really scary to me. How does she feel to you? How does she sound to you? Let me know when I turn this on to remind for you guys. Terrence fell out of his chair. He was turned into an apple. Mauricia tried to run away. She was halfway to the door as Mrs. Gorf's right ear began to wiggle. When she reached the door, Mrs. Gorf's left ear wiggled. Mauricia opened the door and had 1 foot outside when Mrs. Gorf stuck out her tongue. Mauricia became an apple. Mrs. Gorf picked up the apple from the floor and put it on her desk with the others. Then a funny thing happened. Mrs. Gorf turned around and fell over a piece of chalk. That sounds a little suspicious to me. Let's keep reading, guys. The 3 Erics laughed. They were turned into apples. Over her slipping over a piece of chalk? Mrs. Gorf had a dozen apples on her desk. If you know what number a dozen equals, tell me and remind. Joe, John, Todd, Stephen, Kathy, Paul, Nancy, Terrence, Mauricia, and the 3 Erics, Eric Fry, Eric Bacon, and Eric Ovens. Louise, the yard teacher, walked into the classroom. He had missed the children at recess. He had heard that Mrs. Gorf was a mean teacher, so he came up to investigate. He saw the 12 apples on Mrs. Gorf's desk. I must be wrong, he thought. She must be a good teacher if so many children bring her apples. He walked back down to the playground. What is Louise not seeing that these children see? The next day, a dozen more children were turned into apples. Louise, the art teacher, came back into the room. He saw 24 apples on Mrs. Gorf's desk. There were only 3 children left in the class. Okay, math question for you guys. Mrs. Gorf originally had a dozen apples on her desk. Now she has 24. All right? If she only has 24 apples on her desk and 3 students left in class, how many students are there total in the classroom? She must be the best teacher in the world, he thought. By the end of the week, all of the children were apples. Mrs. Gorf was very happy. Now I can go home, she said. I don't have to teach anymore. I won't have to walk up 30 flights of stairs ever again. That's a workout, y'all. 30 flights of stairs. But I still don't like Mrs. Gorf. It's mean that she turned all of her students into apples. You're not going anywhere, shouted Todd. He jumped off the desk and bopped Mrs. Gorf on the nose. Remember, Todd's an apple, and he just bopped Mrs. Gorf on the nose. Oops, I skipped a page. Sorry, guys. The rest of the apples followed. Mrs. Gorf fell on the floor. The apples jumped all over her. Stop, she shouted, or I'll turn you into applesauce. But the apples didn't stop, and Mrs. Gorf could do nothing about it. Turn us back into children, Todd demanded. Mrs. Gorf had no choice. She stuck out her tongue, wiggled her ears. This time her left one first, then her right, and turned the apples back into children. All right, said Mauricia. Let's go get Louis. He'll know what to do. No! Screamed Mrs. Gorf. I'll turn you back into apples. She wiggled her ears, first her right one, then her left, and she stuck out her tongue. But Jenny held up a mirror, and Mrs. Gorf turned herself into an apple. How did a mirror turn Mrs. Gorf into an apple? It's a really good question. Think about it, guys. Let me know. The children didn't know what to do. They didn't have a teacher. Even though Mrs. Gorf was mean, they didn't think it was right to leave her as an apple. But none of them knew how to wiggle their ears. Can you guys wiggle your ears? If you can, send me a picture. Louis, the yard teacher, walked in. Where's Mrs. Gorf? He asked. Nobody said a word. Boy, am I hungry, said Louis. I don't think Mrs. Gorf would mind if I ate this apple. After all, she always has so many. He picked up the apple, which was really Mrs. Gorf, shined it up on his shirt, and ate it. Is this the end of Mrs. Gorf? Let's find out. Chapter 2, Mrs. Jules. Who's Mrs. Jules? Mrs. Jules had a terribly nice face. She stood at the bottom of Wayside School and looked up. She was supposed to teach the class on the 30th story. The children on the 30th story were scared. They had never told anybody what happened to Mrs. Gorf. They hadn't had a teacher for 3 days. They were afraid of what their new teacher would be like. They had heard she'd be a terribly nice teacher. They had never had a nice teacher. They were terribly afraid of nice teachers. Why would the students be terribly afraid of terribly nice teachers? That doesn't make sense to me. Why don't you guys think about it? Let me know, okay? Mrs. Jules walked up the winding, creaking staircase to the 30th story. She was also afraid. She was afraid of the children. She had heard that they would be horribly cute children. She had never taught cute children. She was horribly afraid of cute children. Guys, Mrs. Jules and these children do not make any sense to me. They're afraid of someone being either horribly nice or horribly cute. Let's keep reading. She opened the door to the classroom. She was terribly nice. The children could tell just by looking at her. Mrs. Jules looked at the children. They were horribly cute. In fact, they were much too cute to be children. "I don't believe it," said Mrs. Jules. "It's a room full of cute baby tigers." The children looked at each other. They didn't see any cute baby tigers. "This is ridiculous," said Mrs. Jules. "Just ridiculous. I walked all the way up 30 flights of stairs for nothing but a class of cute baby tigers. What do they think I am? I'm a teacher, not a zookeeper." The children looked at her. They didn't know what to say. Todd scratched his head. "Oh, I'm sorry," said Mrs. Jules. "Please don't get me wrong. I have nothing against cute baby tigers. It's just that I was expecting children. I like tigers, I really do. Why, I'm sure we can play all kinds of tiger games." "What are you talking about?" asked Todd. Mrs. Jules nearly fell off her chair. "Well, what do you know? A talking tiger? Tomorrow I'll bring you a piece of steak." "My name is Todd," said Todd. The children were flabbergasted. Do you know what the word flabbergasted means? Here's my challenge for you guys. I want you to look up the word flabbergasted and use it in a sentence, and then send it to me through Remind. They all raised their hands. "I'm sorry," said Mrs. Jules, "but I don't have enough steaks for all of you. I didn't expect this. Next week, I'll bring in a whole bunch of steaks." "I don't want a steak," said Calvin. "I'm not a cute baby tiger." "Would you like a peanut?" asked Mrs. Jules. "I think I might have a bag of peanuts in my purse. Wait a second. Yes, here it is." "Thanks," said Calvin. Calvin liked peanuts. Allison stood up. "I'm not a baby tiger," she said. "I'm a girl. My name is Allison, and so is everybody else." Mrs. Jules was shocked. "Do you mean to tell me that every cute baby tiger in here is named Allison?" "No," said Jenny. "She means we are all children. My name is Jenny." "No," said Mrs. Jules. "You're much too cute to be children." Jason raised his hand. "Yes," said Mrs. Jules, "the tiger in the red shirt." "My name is Jason," said Jason, "and I'm not a tiger." "You're too small to be a lion," said Mrs. Jules. "I'm a boy," said Jason. "You're not a tiger?" asked Mrs. Jules. "No," said Jason. "And the rest of the class, they're not cute baby tigers either?" asked Mrs. Jules. "No," said Allison. "That is what we've been trying to tell you." "Are you sure?" asked Mrs. Jules. "We'd know if we were cute baby tigers, wouldn't we?" asked Calvin. "I don't know," said Mrs. Jules. "Do cute baby tigers know that they are tigers?" "I don't know," said Allison. "I'm not a tiger." "No, I suppose you're not," said Mrs. Jules. "Okay, in that case we have a lot of work to do. Reading, writing, subtraction, addition, spelling. Everybody take out a piece of paper. We will have a test now." Jason tapped Todd on the shoulder. He said, "Do you want to know something? I liked it better when she thought we were tigers." "I know," said Todd. "I guess now it means she won't bring me a steak." "There will be no talking in class," said Mrs. Jules. She wrote Todd's name on the blackboard under the word discipline. Now guys, that was a crazy second chapter. I mean, what teacher thinks that her students are cute baby tigers? Well, I'm going to leave it for you guys. Remember, I asked you a couple of questions and I want to hear from you through Remind, but I have one more question for you, okay? At the very end of the book, at the very last sentence of our chapter, sorry, not the end of the book, we're not there yet. At the very last sentence of our second chapter, Mrs. Jules does this. She wrote Todd's name on the blackboard under the word discipline. Just like flabbergasted, I want you to find what the word discipline means and use it in a sentence and then tell me through a mind. Okay? I love you guys. I hope you guys have a wonderful week. I miss all of you, and I hope that I get to see you guys soon. Love you guys. Bye.